Welcome to Well Warrior Culture, a community of support based on my books, Wellness Warrior Style, Mindfulness for Warriors, the Mindfulness for Warriors Handbook, and the 21-Day Meditation Jumpstart Journal. This is the Well Warrior Show, and I'm your host, Kim Colegrove. I work with society's warriors, protectors, guardians, and healers, and your families to help you rebuild resilience and embrace well-being. If your profession exposes you to trauma and the trauma of others, Well Warrior Culture is for you. You deserve to live, work, and retire healthfully, and I'm glad you're here. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Well Warrior Show. I'm your host, Kim Colegrove, and today I'm sitting down with Kevin Pannell. Kevin is the host of the Hope is Not a Plan podcast, and I met Kevin a few years ago when he had an earlier iteration of his podcast, and I just stumbled upon the podcast and heard him talking about my first book, Mindfulness for Warriors. So I reached out to him and we did an episode. We've stayed in touch since then, and I just love everything he's doing. So we're going to sit down and talk with Kevin Pannell today. Kevin, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to just jump in and tell us about yourself, your professional history and how you landed on a path that's really all about kind of getting your you-know-what together and health and wellness and all that. So tell us your story.
Sure. My story kind of in earnest starts, I was a hospital corpsman in the U.S. Navy, so I worked with critically ill patients on emergencies, both hospital at Bethesda Naval Hospital and on the hospital ship Comfort. So that knowing now started my journey of building stuff up in my head, right? That wasn't always flowery and good. Got out of that though, which was good, into IT support, fixing computers and those kind of things, and then felt the call, used the GI Bill, and went back to school for Homeland Security and ended up working for state government, actually in public health and public safety and emergency management for a good number of years. And then I was an EMS captain. So again, a little more exposure, a little more buildup. Not the greatest coping mechanisms, not eating healthy, as many first responders don't, because you're on the run, running calls, or you're at the station, carb loading, getting exercise. And then got into healthcare IT, where I could blend my whole past together kind of and manage projects and enable healthcare providers, not me having to glove up anymore, but with new technologies and really support them with new technology that makes their job better, whether it's a new workflow or a new device or something like that. And so that's where I am now. And throughout that have gathered a bunch of not great habits, as again, first responders do. I stayed hydrated with the various types of beers and liquors, and it wasn't an all the time thing. It wasn't a non-functional or functional alcoholic kind of thing, but that's how we coped a lot, right? And so getting to where I am now, a couple years ago, and over the past probably 3 years, had some serious medical illnesses in my family, including actually my father and my father-in-law, and that was close calls, so it's trauma, like this could happen, that can happen. And folks can imagine when you think about your parents getting really sick, to the point of getting heart surgery, to the point of having a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, your brain goes down the road, especially if you've seen it before. And so when I was in the Navy, I saw a lot of end-of-life stuff from cancer, from trauma, from that. So it triggers all those things, right, when I hear that. But now it's my dad. And so I had a huge panic attack, rose out of bed and had that anxious, feeling, couldn't slow myself down, didn't have the tools then to do that.
Was that your first panic attack?
It was the first one that was big, where I couldn't get past it, and I didn't
in the
realize
middle
it
of
till
it,
now.
did you know it was a panic attack, or did you not know what was happening to you?
It was kind of in my head, and kind of talking to my wife, and hey, just get your breath. I was like, I can't. And I had heard of them before, but I'd never had one, or I thought I hadn't, but I'd had some times where I'd got weak legs and nervous and thought oh, what's wrong with me? But it was the buildup, right, of the stress. And so looking back again, there were some signs, but nothing like this. I've been scared on an airplane, on a roller coaster, when you're, hit turbulence, and I'm not a great flyer, so that doesn't help. But not like this, where I thought, like, I can't slow my heart down. My pressure feels like it's sky high. There's nothing I can do. We called the ambulance. I got a ride. I started shaking. All I could think about was like, I was scared to keep going and scared to die at the same time. It's the worst fear I've ever felt. Like I've been pretty scared with different things I've done in my life. But
Yeah, I love to have people expand that description of what they experienced, because I know that a lot of people listening have had a panic attack or will have a panic attack, and I've talked to so many people over the years that had a panic attack but didn't know what it was, and they thought they were having a heart attack, they thought they were dying, and it can feel like that. I mean, can absolutely feel like you're dying. So I just want people to understand it's not uncommon, and there's nothing wrong with you if you have one. It's just like you said, it's just a buildup of emotions and unprocessed stuff and worries and anxiety. Yeah, and I interviewed someone else named Randy that described his first panic attack. It was very intense. I thought it was helpful that he described that. So thanks for going into detail about
absolutely.
that. That's really, really scary. So yeah, so just continue from there.
Sure. And then after that, we were in the hospital for hours and, waiting. Is it my heart? You almost hope that it is. So you don't think, oh, it's just in my head. But also certainly I don't want to hear that, yes, you did have one from the blood work or something, but somewhere in my head looking back, and it's easy now looking back, easy quote, that like, I knew I didn't have chest pain, all that, but again, your mind is not in a place to be rational at all, in that. And so from there, coming home and just, I had the best thing I can describe, and I wasn't in combat. I've never have been, but was like shell shock you see from like the World War II videos where you see someone kind of shaken, like that, just terrified to my core of just being, let alone any particular thing. And so that was part of the ongoing, fear. And so listening to music, I couldn't turn the light off. And I heard, who did I hear? He's the heavyweight champ. He's British. They have a show. He described it perfectly after he had the same kind of thing. And it was, afraid to turn the lights off, like what's going to happen, and just so afraid, almost like a child would be, right? And yeah, that's the best way I can describe it, really. And so sleeping with music on, having the bathroom light on, and just really not being able to kind of pull my nervous system back down into a better place. But then starting to creep up on it. And so certainly after that, I said, I need to go. I'm going to go to my doctor, my primary care physician, and see how that goes. And it goes probably how a lot of people think it goes. You fill out a checklist that's a mental health evaluation. What do you think about this? You're going to hurt yourself? Are you anxious? Are you depressed? You talk about things, and then it's not long before they offer a prescription. Right. For either a strong immediate thing or a long-term thing.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to have a big reaction to that, but I think that's just too overdone. And absolutely, some people need a little something for sure. So I want to be really careful. I have a bias against that because I do not believe, my listeners know that the reason I do this work is that I lost my own husband. And I will never believe that he would have taken his own life had he not been on such a dangerous and volatile cocktail of multiple psychotropic medications. However, a lot of people finally go to see their doctor because they have not slept for a week. I mean, 5 days, 6 days, no sleep at all. Right. And so maybe you need something to take the edge off, and maybe you need something to help you sleep. I just would say in parentheses here, what else are you doing in terms of lifestyle improvements? And that's probably where this all led you. So go right ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for me, it was the traditional, one of the SSRIs, right? I forget the acronym, but essentially the antidepressant medications. The big thing I didn't get is, hey, this is probably going to make you feel super weird, like as soon as you take it. Of course, it's, hey, make sure you read the label and this kind of stuff. And that's no knock necessarily on my physician. But I tried it for a day and a half and was like, I'm never taking that again, because you feel like I had to double check, like I'm here, right? With it it's so kind of, for me, the reaction, and I have family members and know folks who have been on antidepressants for a while and no problem, and they have no reaction. I know it varies, like every other medication you see a commercial of, and it has 1,000 side effects listed, right? But for me, it was awful. And so then it was, okay, well, how can I do this without those? And got into, frankly, listening to music with headphones so I could kind of drown things out and calm my mind. I hadn't dove into the mindfulness that we'll touch on, that as part of my regular practice now, and was just so, again, afraid. I was doing those coloring books that are stress management ones, and when you're a dad of 3 boys and married, and I'm listening to music and doing coloring books, you think, who am I? Like, I'm disappointing. It's a heavy thing, and obviously I'm still emotional about it. But the great thing is my family was there, which is one of my big things too, is connections, right? You have to have those, and if you don't, there are other options too, which we can talk about in a bit. But
Yeah, can we pause here just for a moment?
yep, for
Because
sure.
I feel your emotion, and that you're not afraid to say it still makes me emotional. I appreciate that, because
Right.
typically people will say, I'm sorry for getting emotional, which is like a normal human response.
Right.
But the reason I wanted to pause is because a lot of people who are going through this, or have gone through it, or will go through it, they're maybe like towing the line right now, knowing that they're getting close to some kind of a crisis. But the
Right.
immediate emotion is shame.
Yeah,
They feel
absolutely.
shame, embarrassed and shame, because they're not able to maintain that superhero status or whatever it is. And so I'm with you. You have to find some kind of a support. And it doesn't mean it has to be, a spouse and kids. It can be a friend, a trusted mentor, a coworker, a chaplain, a counselor, a sibling you're close to. But you've got to find someone that you can talk to and that will support you unconditionally to help you through it. I mean, we have to do it alone. We have to do it.
Right.
We have to make the choice, but we don't do it by ourselves. We're wired for connection. So that's a great point. And I understand your point of feeling the way you felt, coloring in a coloring book with headphones on, and your family, seeing this, but this was part of your healing path. So yeah.
Absolutely. And it's great you say that too, about because your wife, your kids certainly they're not counselors, they're not professionals, right? They can be sympathetic. So there's also a different benefit that each interaction can provide. And what was amazing to me is how many folks I found out had panic attacks before, dealt with anxiety, right? They kind of come out of the word work, because usually when you're hanging out, you don't talk about it, right? One of my best friends who I was a corpsman with, who's a career fire guy, same thing. A guy that was a retired law enforcement officer, folks that are just like, folks in your life have issues, and a lot of it comes out when you will open yourself up to say, I have issues.
Yes.
And that is
Yes.
great.
My experience is, I've said this about my husband, and I still really believe this, without, I'm not criticizing him. I understand, but uh, something that prevented him from getting the help that would have made a difference for him was, he told himself this story that everyone else was doing okay. Why can't I handle it? He looked around, the people he worked with, or the people in the neighborhood, or wherever he would look, and everyone else seemed fine. And I would say, well, yeah, because they're the people you work with, or they're the people you're BSing with in the neighborhood. Of course, because if they're struggling, they're pretending like they're not, just like you.
Right.
And
Yep.
what I'm realizing in this, I guess it's 7 or 8 years now that I've been doing this work full time, is those informal leaders within these organizations, across this population of kind of these warrior professions, but these informal leaders who help do what you did, get on a healing path, find the help, improve their mental and emotional health and all that, and then open up to other people about it, and want to
Right.
share it, and want to reach back to other people. So we'll openly say with no shame, oh yeah, I got help. Here's what I did. I went to counseling.
Right.
Those people like you are making a huge difference for others.
Good. I hope so, because
Yeah.
it's awful. There's really, it's awful leading up to it, because you're not a great person. Your attitude's horrible. I felt physically, like, I worked out all the time, right? but I also, had drinks all the time. I also ate not great all the time. I also didn't sleep good. So, we think we're doing okay, and then we get this surprise gift that's like, hey, guess what? You're not. Right. And so, and again, I love being able to look back at that because it corrected stuff that I was doing that, I should have corrected earlier, but, we're human. So we find out the hard way often.
Sure. Yeah, that's how most of us like to learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Waiting for
Seems
some
like,
reason.
I mean, especially public safety and military folks who are often one and the same, it's not uncommon. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it really was eye-opening and reassuring and super helpful because I had some of the most open conversations I've ever had with family and friends. And that's the other value too, is that's an invaluable thing, right? When there's no nonsense, there's no airs. One of my best friends, again, the guy that's a corpsman, is a fire captain, and has been for a bit. He reminded me there's no trauma Olympics, right? Like we don't have to go back and forth on whose was worse, right? And so
That
that happens
happens
though.
though. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Jinx, you owe me a Coke.
for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
that happens all the time. I hear this all the time. And people who go to, for instance, go to a group therapy or a program, and then they feel like, oh, well, I wasn't in frontline combat like that, so my trauma doesn't matter. I mean, that kind of comparison, y'all,
Yeah.
is not helping anybody,
No.
Yeah.
And it's real. Like I was in from 94 to 2000. Never heard a shot fired. In DC I did, but not like on a on a battlefield. But you know what? You can see awful things without being in combat. And I have respect for both. And you know what? The folks that aren't, I'll say the veterans that aren't full of crap, realize the same thing, right? And a lot of them combat veterans realize like it doesn't matter what you did. It's folks who still won't let their ego go. That's like, no, this service is better than that service, or whether you were a patrolman or a SWAT person, or you are a truck, or that, like, it doesn't matter. You can see awful things, and someone's one super traumatic incident could be the worst thing ever. And somebody else can have like 10 of those and it affects them different or doesn't. And there's no, I loved how he framed it because it's not a competition. Like you're not going to win the gold because you saw the worst thing, quote, worse than what I did.
That's it. I love that so much because trauma didn't get the message. Trauma doesn't know what your job is. Trauma doesn't care which one of these professions or what specifically you experienced or saw or read or how many times. Like trauma doesn't care about that. It impacts us all. So
right.
yeah.
I mean, and you don't have to have a, cargo pants and a button up and a patch and some cool gear. One of my biggest traumas happened when my wife and I were at a hot air balloon incident or event and it was a hot air balloon incident. So it's like, even though we're talking about, largely first responders and some military folks, like plenty of folks walking around that will never put on a uniform have horrible things, right? And so
100,000,000%. That's right.
Yeah.
And conversely, there are a lot of people in the military and in first responder in the surrounding professions that don't necessarily have intense professional trauma, but they did experience childhood trauma, and they drug that trauma into a profession that was bound to expose them to trauma of some kind, right? But they're unconscious to that. They're unaware. I just did a course on Pause First Academy on adverse childhood experiences. And there's something called the ACEs quiz or the ACEs questionnaire. It's a 10-question quiz you can take that kind of helps you wrap your mind and your arms around any childhood trauma that you experienced and how that can impact you in your adult life. So there's that piece too, where, you've got other things from childhood or from outside of the profession that are impacting your mental and emotional health. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So once you started to practice some kind of self-awareness and self-reflection, and you realized, okay, I gotta get a hold of this, what were some of those early interventions or first steps that you took?
I gave myself time, so I took off work, right? Realizing, and some of the things I took off from jujitsu, which I do. So it was like, what are things that bring me stress? I like jujitsu, but it's pretty stressful. But what I need to give myself, like just me, time, right? Which is okay. And I think that's one of my big things is boundaries, right? Like right now, I need space between me and anything else. And so I very much I'm a planning person, hence hope it's not a planning podcast, but then I've done that my whole life. And so thinking, okay, let me reach out. So I found resources, your book, right? I found that. I found Man's Search for Meaning, which is one of the greatest things I've ever read. I've read it like 3 times now. So I just started reaching out. I found some other folks, online and figuring out like, I have this thing that happened. How do I make it better? And so I started, researching trauma, processing trauma, anxiety, depression, tools for that, like the tapping exercises, breathing. Mindfulness came in. I can't remember exactly when, but certainly early on, and started the 10 minutes. I used the no affiliation, the Headspace app, just because for me, I know I can set a timer, but it's helpful for me to have somebody else do that stuff for me, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
And
just
just real
started.
quick, just to interject really quick for anyone who you kind of breezed past the tapping thing,
Oh
but
yeah,
it's called EFT,
EFT.
tapping. If anyone's interested in just going to see that, that's just one intervention or one therapy that you might try, EFT tapping. Yeah, and I love Headspace.
Wow.
There's several great apps that I love, love,
Right.
love for anyone who's like ready to dip their toe in the pool of
Mhm.
meditation and mindfulness and maybe check it out.
Right.
I love um, Headspace. I like 10% Happier. I
Oh, cool.
use Insight Timer. I don't know if Insight Timer is one you've ever heard of, but that's another good suggestion for anyone who's listening that's starting to look for resources. Okay,
Cool.
continue.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing. I mean, and this was, a couple years ago, but now there are endless resources now. They vary, right? And you may like one better than the other. And I think overall the strategy that I had, and I had been working out regularly, which I think was the backbone of how I got better faster. And it's still going. I mean, I still get anxious every now and then, so it's not like this goes away.
Yeah.
But
Well,
the
you learn
fact that
you
I
learn
was,
to modulate and regulate, and
Mhm.
you learn to recognize it, and you learn how you can impact your own nervous system, and
Mhm.
that becomes second nature
Absolutely.
once you learn these habits. Did you use a therapy or counseling of any kind?
I did. I didn't right away. Initially, it was okay. I have to get up and walk, and I would be still anxious. My sleep was awful. It was awful before, but then it got consciously more awful because I thought about it too much, and that's a whole cycle. And I'm sure we'll talk about better sleep, but it was like okay, regardless of the fact that I think or I actually didn't sleep well, I have to get up and I'm going to go walk. So like every single day, I got up and walked at least a mile. And that's where like I'd be walking and listening, and unfortunately my favorite, positive person, they changed the voice. So anyway, that's a whole. I'll reach back out to Spotify after this. So the
Okay,
but
I love to hear you say that you walked because I know you are a fitness you're kind of a fitness guru. I mean, I know you are very into physical fitness, so it's great to hear
yes,
you say that you used walking because I think
absolutely.
that some certain people with certain personalities that are like really go-getters would
Mhm.
think walking's too soft or it's too weak or it's not going to, but there are so many benefits of walking. There's a course on
Absolutely.
Pause First Academy called Walking Away from Stress,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's a course done by a former police commander, and so that some of the he includes some of the data in there. But I love that you said that because that's so good for mental, emotional, and physical health. Way better than people understand, especially if you're walking
Mhm.
outside.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I'm fortunate to live in Southwest Virginia. I'm in the mountains. There's trees everywhere. So everywhere I walk in my neighborhood, it's like that. And then some we have a path. So I consciously knew or had looked up, nature helps more in walking. And so that walking all the time was a huge thing for me. Like every morning, regardless, you're like, you have to do it. And I had heard from someone else, one of the other resources I looked at it online, that the phrase like move a muscle, change a thought. So you get that anxious feeling, cool. You got to start to redirect that and use that energy, right? Or it's going to sit there and you're going to keep freaking out or something like that. Or and so it really does make a difference moving. And then, I would do regular exercise. I'd say kind of guru, I appreciate that, but I think it becomes, or it should become, a part of who you are, because it like you mentioned, emotionally, physically, and mentally, moving regularly, whether you do yoga, go for a walk, do heavy deadlifts, do cross, whatever you do, play badminton, it doesn't matter, right? And that's the thing about public safety folks, right? Traditionally, it was lift heavy, eat a lot, be huge. But then you have no gas tank to chase somebody or to pull people out of a fire or do this, right? And so I think fortunately over the years, the fitness focus part has gotten better. So it's more functional, but maybe not as connected to, hey, you also realize that's helping your brain as much or more than maybe these pills, right? And so again, no bust, but it's true. Like I've talked about that recently on my show as well. And the benefit of just regular physical activity changes your brain. And of course, your body, it's kind of straightforward. It makes you healthier in so many different ways. So that to me was the backbone that I built other stuff on, the walking, honestly. And then I'm fortunate, but purposely built myself a garage gym. So you, again, remove the excuses. There's no commute. I can get up and walk over there, and doesn't have to be fancy. My first garage gym was a big shed, and it was a bar in the rafters, like a pipe, and then some kettlebells or something. So, but again, you don't need that. You can use your body weight and stuff for folks that maybe have gotten off the fitness path for a little bit. But I highly recommend the things we've talked about that I'm sure we'll talk about. Fitness will help them. It'll help you sleep better. It'll help your mental health. It'll help maybe you set your own boundaries. Like maybe the folks that you're exercising with aren't great, right? So all these different things to look at.
Yeah. So you have a list of 7 things, right? Is that right?
Yes.
You have a list of 7 core things that helped you that you kind of recommend to others. Can we just dive into those?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. The first one is, and I'm sure, which is great. A lot of folks that are watching this, listening, have heard of Jacko Willink, and I imagine maybe you have too. So he's a retired Navy SEAL, wrote a book called Extreme Ownership. The whole principle is leadership is the cause of all failures, all successes.
Will you spell that last name for anyone who might want to check out that book?
Willink, yep, Jacko, Jocko, Willink, Willink. The book's Extreme Ownership, and then Leif, Leif, Babin, Babin. I have it right up there, but Leif Babin. So they're both Navy SEALs. They retired. That book came out in 2015, I think. And so the concept, and as they say, they're not the first ones, but they really emphasize it and package it well, is, and I call these things pillars because it was catchy for the title of my podcast episode, honestly. But honestly, it's really what I see them as, pillars that hold you up. And so is ownership, right? I have to own where I am now. I had to own that I was locked up in fear, and I'd been depressed, and I'd been treating myself by drinking each night instead of going to sleep when I should, and all that. So, and if you don't do that, you're never going to get better. Because if you don't own it and you say, well, the doctor told me this and so didn't give me the plan, or if you have faith, you can't go, well, God's going to show me. Well, cool, he might, but he's also going to say you have to get off your butt and do something.
You have to take a step on your own behalf. I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I talk a lot about self-awareness and self-reflection and, the self-empowerment. There's some ownership here. It's not going to happen accidentally. And you have to be aware if you're playing the victim or blaming other people. Like it can, for sure, a rough marriage could contribute to it. Working for an organization you don't trust can contribute. Like all these things can contribute, but ultimately what you're saying is of taking ownership. That's got to be a piece. Yeah.
Has to be. And it has to be the first thing, or I think none of the rest of it's going to work. Again, because no one's going to come in. I was 48 years old. No one's going to come hold my hand and have me do it.
No one's coming to save you.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. The
Ownership.
second thing for me is mindfulness, right? And so that's been such a huge thing for me. The basics, and I know you have a lot more resources, is 10 minutes seems to be for me the sweet spot. I've done longer, I've done shorter, but I don't have time. But 10 minutes where I can sit there, I follow along and essentially pay attention to my body, pay attention to my breath. Not have my phone because it's playing what I listen to, but and then sit on the front porch or somewhere else, but I'm not connected to anything else but me. And that is such a huge value because you start to learn down the road and one of the later pillars, like how to calm yourself down when you're trying to sleep, because you know how to do it during the day. Like it's all connected. But that mindfulness practice is huge. And I don't hit it every day. I hit it almost every day and I think that's the thing too, is set time, whether you're on patrol, whether you're at a station, whether you're at a post as EMS, something like you have 5 or 10 minutes every day. Like I know it because I've been there, even on a busy day. You're sitting around the kitchen table BSing. Hey, like grab your headphones and go back in your bunk room, or
for 5 minutes. 5
absolutely.
minutes. Yeah.
And the short difference, the difference is just how long you have on the different focus areas, right? On your breath and your body, but that's been a huge thing. And I think once you've taken ownership and you can focus on your mind, then to me, the third pillar is movement of some kind, whether it's a walk, whether it's weights, whether it's a run, whatever it is, but you have to move every day. And I think probably more so, anxiousness, you can get kind of jittery and shaky, which is actually good because to get rid of it, one of the things is like shaking, right? And that, so imagine doing that, but you're working out and you're also getting in better shape. So win-win. It's just a great thing. So some form of movement. But I think the bigger challenge is maybe folks that feel depressed, get stuck and they don't want to move.
Yeah.
But again, no one's coming to pick you up off the couch. So you complaining about gaining weight because you're not getting off the couch is nobody else's fault. And that's harsh words for people to hear.
It's really hard for people that are struggling with depression for sure.
Yes.
But you start anything, just promising yourself, okay, I'll force myself to walk around the block one time. It's not, I mean, I'm not going to burn a bunch of calories or anything, but something that gets that momentum going. Okay. So ownership, mindfulness, movement, and
boundaries. So, one of the things I realized is I hadn't necessarily set a boundary between me and the time I put into work, right? We're connected all the time now, so I can work all the time now. And so sometimes I did. Sometimes I'd play video games too much. Sometimes I would set too much boundary. So I got in this habit of, particularly when we were going to the hospital a lot, of, okay, I'm going to be here for everybody because I'm the medical guy, right? And I'm going to help. But that takes a toll, right? There's a call. But that was happening in my house. And so to me, I would, I wouldn't want to watch something. I was, depressed, not happy. And so I would just get a drink and go to my room and watch, right? So I set boundaries that weren't helpful. So I don't think it's just about a boundary between something that's not serving you, but maybe you're setting too many boundaries between you and other people, right? So it's some kind of boundaries. And so
set boundaries, don't build walls.
oh yeah, great.
Don't build a wall between you and your spouse.
Yeah.
But I'll always find to set a boundary. Great to set a boundary between yourself and work. I co-teach with somebody who was in law enforcement for 29 years, and he always asks everybody in the room, officially, how many hours does your employer pay you to work in a week? Officially, 40 hours. How many hours do you think you work? And, he makes a great point. You'd be surprised if you calculated how many hours you actually work, because how often do you check your phone? How often do you check emails, reply to emails, all of that stuff when you're way outside the confines of what your shift.
Right.
So, so boundaries.
Yeah. And I think for not just personally, but at work. So when I was an EMS captain, a big part of what I did was help plan our schedule for the year, right? What shifts cover the demand. And the same thing can be replicated in fire and in police, in whatever shifts they have for the crime or the calls. And so part of that is too, as a leader in that space, you have to set boundaries for other people. So some people try and work all the time, some because they have a monetary need, they say, but you can let them work all the time and then they burn themselves out and lead to like what we're talking about or worse. Right. And so I think in addition to, particularly in the public safety space, setting those boundaries for you, what doesn't serve you, say no to things. You don't have to pick up that extra shift if you can afford not to, right? Make sure your people, you're setting boundaries for them if you can too. So
that's a great point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's the fourth. The fifth thing for me is connection, right? I was so disconnected. I've been working remote still since 2019. Just on like this on Zoom, and then not connecting, right? Not hanging out with people, not making connections. I'd sit and watch TV all the time or play games or whatever. I'd kind of have connection to jiu-jitsu, which is great. And that's something I improved, right? Reach back out to friends out of necessity, like we talked to about earlier, after that, but then staying in touch because I wasn't a good communicator because I wasn't in a good place, honestly. So I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to call anybody.
I think that's the first go-to for a lot of people is isolating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it feels right. And it's so wrong. Like you mentioned earlier, humans aren't meant to be by ourselves. We're not meant to be Tom Hanks on an island.
We're
meant to
built
have a village.
for connection. We're pack animals. We are. We're built for connection. And so to isolate just compounds everything.
Absolutely.
I understand how people get there though.
For sure. And then after connection, sleep. And I know for first responders, this is a huge problem, whether because their shifts, they're on call, all of that, all the stuff that's in their head when they go to lay down. And for me, I really dove into learning more about sleep hygiene, right? Like not eating a few hours before bed, not, alcohol negatively affects it. So, and I'm not the like, don't drink guy, I have alcohol now. I have a better relationship with it is
Yeah, I
really the
think it
honest part
depends
of it.
on the individual.
Absolutely.
Some people have to cut out alcohol because
Hmm.
they start on the healing path and they go, I'm an alcoholic. They didn't, maybe didn't even realize.
Right.
So some people have to quit, need to quit for their own health and their own life. Not everybody has to quit. Some people can be, but the awareness of it, we've got a couple of sleep hygiene courses
Okay.
and we talk about some of that, you know, sleep hygiene stuff that, a lot of people roll their eyes at in the beginning. But
Hmm.
if you try it for 2 weeks, what do you have to lose? Dimming
Right.
the lights and watching how much alcohol you consume and recognizing when alcohol disrupts your sleep patterns
Right.
and watching how much caffeine you consume and what time of the day before you're going to sleep that you're consuming the alcohol. Like there's a whole bunch of different components and you
Right.
can start by just trying one or two of them. But all of us, like this whole planet, we have got to get our sleep problems under
Right.
control. And it's prevalent in these professions. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and the great thing is, well, not great thing, but it's going to be harder before it gets better. Like my battle with sleep and being, having insomnia after that was awful, where it just made it worse each day as you don't sleep. And then the problem is your mindset, right? Then you hate sleep, then sleep's your enemy, then certainly you're not going to sleep anymore. And so improving the sleep hygiene, like you said, dim the lights a couple hours before bed, you have to be stricter on it to get yourself better. Then you can relax a little bit. You still stay up and watch a movie with the family. Like, but I was very strict. I was like, it's 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock was my time, regular bedtime, regular wake up time being like critical. Right. And so I was like, okay, everybody. But you have to do that. And you don't want to push people away, but that's going to make you better. It's going to make your sleep better. Then of course, sleep is where our mind and our body heals. So
Oh gosh,
that's
I mean,
a
we could
critical
do a whole
focus.
hour just on
Yeah.
that.
On sleep.
And
Yeah.
you said something earlier, you touched on something earlier that I think is prevalent, and that is that cycle of anxiety and that
Hmm.
cycle of sleeplessness and anxiety,
Right.
where the the fear of not being able to sleep even becomes worse than not being able to sleep. And then it just
Right.
creates this vicious cycle of, oh, I almost dread going, I'm exhausted, bone tired. I
Right.
almost dread going to bed because I know I'm not going to be able to sleep. So that cycle is like, we don't want to let that go on,
Mhm.
for too long. And I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, yep.
Yeah, great point.
um, okay. Yeah.
And that, and with that, you mentioned, something because people aren't sleeping, whether it's a pill or something. And the best thing for me was behavior change, not anything that I put in my mouth. And
Yeah,
so,
and so that this is not to knock anybody who's on the
sure.
medications or,
Yeah.
or open to the medications. I want to be very clear out there.
Mhm.
I have a bias against them for a very specific reason, but not strictly against them. I don't
Right.
think that, I do believe some people need the medications, maybe even just for a buffer for a while.
Hmm.
And some of us are just born with a funky brain for one reason or another. And maybe so it's not to knock anyone who's taking the
Right.
medications. And I would never recommend you stop taking your medications without a
Right.
process and help and intervention and lifestyle changes. But I always say to people in these professions, you guys, people like you across these professions, apply some of the discipline and the
Right.
dedication that you've applied to your profession to yourself and your own life. You have it in you. You can do anything. You've already proven it. You're like our superheroes. The
Right.
things you do for other people, apply some of that for yourself, to yourself. You guys, I know you know this, you guys are sometimes the worst at taking care of yourselves at all because there's a part of you that feels like you're just here to take care of others, to be of service to others, to save, fix, rescue, problem solve. And if you could just turn some of those skills back on yourself. And for some reason, there are a lot of people across these warrior professions that are
Mhm.
very resistant to that,
Right.
to helping themselves. But you got it in you, you've got the discipline, or you wouldn't have been able to do this job. Now just use it personally.
Yeah, that's a great kind of step back to say, and I say about the behavior being better than pills because I tried them, right? I tried strong ones that are like just for tonight, knock you out. I tried prescription things, melatonin, which is what everybody takes too much of the wrong way. Like you realize like
Yes,
it's not
yes.
a
And the
sleeping pill.
synthetic melatonins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again,
But
that could be an
I,
hour.
yeah, for sure. But I think that's part of, to your point, like the effort you put in to get cleared as a police officer or an engine driver or whatever, which takes study and repetitiveness. That's what gets you back to a good sleep pattern. Now, that doesn't help your shift and not sleeping, but when you're not on shift, that's when you got to put the time into it to make it better. But put that time into also research like what works, and like the information's there and it's not that deep in the internet or on your site. Like it's just there. And that's one thing that I've found the most of. People think more melatonin right before is better, and it's not, right? It's not even made for regular sleep. But anyway, to not
Yeah,
last an
that's
hour
a
of
whole other thing.
melatonin.
Hey,
Yeah.
everybody, if you'd like for us to do an episode on melatonin,
Yeah,
reach out and
seriously.
we'll meet back up. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, so I tried all these things, and eventually it was the mindset change of honestly like talking crap to myself, being like, fine, you're tired, just keep going. Right. And if I mentioned Man's Search for Meaning, it's the most impactful thing I've read,
Man's
other than
search
maybe
for
the Bible.
meaning. All your resources that you mentioned and
Oh,
all
cool.
your
Yeah.
links and everything, I'm gonna include those in the show notes.
Mhm.
Man's search for meaning.
Yep, by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
And so I'd read that, and part of your wind down routine, a couple hours is reading. And so that I was reading, and the perspective of that argument of I'm so tired, I can't do it. Well, his perspective is he was in 4 different concentration camps of World War II, right? So when you just read about any of those experiences, you're like, it's not that bad for me in my house where I'm safe. And yes, I'm tired and it doesn't diminish what I'm going through, but that perspective you get from reading about other people or talking to other people is extremely helpful to again reset that ownership for myself and go, okay, like you can get through this. You're not freezing cold with no shoes on in the snow, having to break rocks with, it's a totally
Yeah,
different
for
thing, and
sure.
it's
I think
hard to get there.
it's healthy if we can do that in the positive. We can do it in the positive.
Yes.
So not like we touched on earlier where someone goes, "Oh, well, she was in combat. I didn't ever see combat, so my trauma's not as bad. I
Right.
probably don't even belong here in this group." That kind of a thing. Like we don't want to do that
Mhm.
comparative thing where we go, "Oh, he had it hard. I don't even have it hard. Why am I, like that?" But it's like using it in the positive. Oh
It's
my
helpful.
gosh, I'm reading about somebody who was able to do this in spite of all of that. I can do it too in spite of all of this.
Great point.
Yeah,
Great point. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's perspective that's, yeah, super helpful. And then for me, the 7th pillar is something that I've struggled with. So I grew up going to church, but it's faith. And it doesn't have to be faith in a singular entity, whether it's Christianity or, Islam or whatever, something that's bigger than you. And because that helps you kind of offset, it doesn't give up your responsibility, your ownership. It doesn't give up all the stuff we've talked about. Um, but I've always admired folks that are just like, well, it's, whatever they believes, it's in their plan and they're with me. And then they're like solid. And I'm like, how do you do that? And this is from going back and forth of raging at the sky at different things I've been with to in the past relying on, for me, God, the Christian God. And then now, coming back to that and putting the time in and realizing like, wow, that's really helpful. Also because practically for folks that aren't at that point or don't want to be or may never be or whatever of having quote religion,
Mm-hmm.
faith is different too, right? It's a belief in something. It's not, doesn't have to be a certain ideology. That's up to
No,
whoever's it
that's
is.
a great point. So we'll have people listening that are religious people and that,
Mhm.
practice Christianity. We'll have a lot of other people that maybe practice different religions, practice
Right.
no religion. There are people who are listening that will consider themselves spiritual, but maybe
Mhm.
not a part of an organized religion. And I would say all of it's okay. Any of it's all. I myself am tolerant of everybody's everything. Whatever is
Right.
your thing, I'm tolerant of it. I'm not going to try and talk you into my beliefs, but I really do recommend that you at least consider that. It's like you said, it's just a belief in something broader, or a belief in something bigger, or a belief in that there's something else besides just
Right.
me in this hardship, that there's something else. So whatever that is for people. And my belief is that there's no there's no one religion. I'm 100% fine with whatever anyone's religion is or spirituality, but I agree with you that it's very difficult to go through these things if you can't believe in something that's a little bigger.
Right.
I mean, we could get into a whole philosophical talk about destiny and, is your life in someone else's hands and all that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And, if you believe there's a plan for your life and you believe that, someone is guiding it or that there's a higher power guiding it or whatever that is, um, there are always steps for us to take and things for us to do, and the ownership piece and the self-reflection and the self-awareness. And sometimes there's some physical steps we have to take too.
Yeah.
We're participants here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And practically, prayer is like meditation, right? You're taking time to yourself, you're focused on something. And not that you can't do it while you're walking down the street or in your car or whatever, but there's very similar benefit to it. So again, if you're walking in the woods and you're like, hey, tree or awesome, like whatever it is, you're putting something out there. So it's a huge difference. And it's great you mentioned whatever plan and whatever deities you believe or don't believe, we have to take action. And another person that's been very influential is and my mother-in-law listened to her a while, but I wasn't there, right? And is Joyce Meyer. I don't know if you've heard of her. So she's a Christian pastor. She has podcasts and things, but the biggest benefit to me, there's some education right in there biblically, but it's exactly what you said. It's you may be blessed by God, but like you have to get up and put your shoes on, right? No one's coming to tie your shoes. And it's that constant message that's like, sure, believe, but also
I mean, none
you're
of
not
us are
going to
just
float out
going
of the bed
to get in a canoe and float downstream forever. You can't just lay there on your couch. And there's
right.
always some ownership and some expectation for you to do some things on your behalf as well. You
Yep.
mentioned meditation being similar to prayer. The way that I think of it, and when I work with people who are a part of an organized religion, and if they're struggling a little bit with meditation and some of the negative connotations or some of the preconceptions about it being a weirdo or, new agey or hippy dippy
Right.
or whatever, is I'll say, well, do you pray? Yeah. Okay. Well, then what prayer is. What do you do when you pray? Well, I talk to God. I ask questions. I ask for things, like things like that. And then I'll say, when do you ever just sit still and quietly to listen for the answers? You could think of meditation as, if that's part of your life, you could think of that. The prayer part is you talking and the meditation part is you just listening. And if you frame it like that, and that's the way you approach it, there's going to be a lot of other benefits too that you'll just discover in the doing of it. Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. Absolutely. It's kind of, like switching between sender and receiver mode. It's kind of, a huge communication mode to your whole being. That's great. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tick these off because these are great.
Thank you.
Okay. So ownership, mindfulness, movement, boundaries, connection, sleep, and faith.
Yes. That's what, looking back and now, what I try, what I put focus on. And I think the other thing is to give yourself, as you look at those, to give yourself the grace to realize they're not all going to be like the strongest pillars all the time. So my sleep might not be good and my faith might not be good, but I'm getting regular exercise and I'm practicing mindfulness. And then, they move around and that's okay. So you can't go from having, let's say for me, a panic attack and then dealing with anxiety and then coming back from that and then realizing, oh, I have to be perfect now and I have to sleep perfect. And like, once you get to a better point, you realize it fluctuates, right? And a lot of it has to do with the decisions you make. Pretty much all of it does, honestly.
Yeah. That's a great point. So if you're going to use these 7 pillars or these 7 tools, like this is a great toolbox for you to have. And so these are your 7 tools that you're going to use. It doesn't mean you have to use them all 100% every single day or you failed.
Right.
I literally, if I could give all warriors, all military veterans, first responders, and all, one gift, it would be the gift to give yourself a break.
Right.
Because of the perfectionism and the type A personalities and you tend to be just the goal setters, the goal achievers, and very hard on yourselves, very, very hard on yourselves. So so I love that. Like it's moderation. You've got these 7, they're not all going to be all fired up all day, every day, and that's okay. Maybe today, this one, that one
Right.
doesn't appeal to me today.
Right.
So I'll just focus on this one for today because I'm not in a great place today. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, moderation and flexibility, and it's a process. It's a journey. It's a process. It's not a one and done. You're not going to do everything tomorrow and then you're fixed.
Right. No,
Yeah.
that's, I think that's one of the most critical things too, is it's not going to be easy and it's not going to happen overnight,
But
regardless
the
of what modality.
benefits, the payoff,
Oh, it's huge.
the effort is so worth the benefits and the
Right.
payoff and how much you can heal your life.
Hmm.
So that effort, that's probably the best effort you'll ever make is the effort on your own behalf, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So before we wrap up and say goodbye, will you just tell us everything you have going on, how people can get a hold of you, maybe talk just a little bit about your podcast and what you have going on over there?
Sure. So I've podcasted for a while. This kind of redo is Hope is Not a Plan. The whole concept, and I'm breaking the rules of, oh, you should have a niche to get more down, whatever. But my focus is helping people, much like you. It's I know a lot of people are stuck somewhere, whether it's I'm depressed, or whether it's I want to change jobs, or whether it's I want to know how to plan this thing. And so the name says it all, right? Hope will get you so far. Hope will give you inspiration, but it's not a plan. And I've been planning things for a long time, both for myself, like we talked about today, at work, in projects and programs, in my fitness, and in a family. And so I share practical steps about, I look up, what are people looking for? What have I gone through that I know have helped, that I've talked to folks? And so I share, here's a problem, let's talk about it, and here's a plan to make whatever hopes you have, into action or actionable. And so I do that every week. And then each Monday they come out a full, and by full, it's like 20 minutes, right? So they're quick hit things. And then each Friday I do a 5-minute Friday where I take an element from that and say, okay, here's a deeper dive into that thing. It's kind of the tempo I'm in, but I have Instagram and Twitter, and it's Hope's Not a Plan, for both of those. And then I have the
Can you
Hope is
spell
Not
that
a
out?
Plan, HOPESNOT, a plan.
Okay,
Um,
hope. So not hope is, hopes, not
excuse me.
a plan. Okay.
And that's the website too, because Hope is Not a Plan was taken. So I'm still figuring out how I can get that. So hopesnotaplan.com is the website. So I have posts there from the episodes I've done, transcripts of the episodes, and I'm going to add some more resources there. Folks can ask me a question, whether it's about this or anything else related to the show, or just if you're stuck. Have a YouTube channel, which is probably what you're alluding to for the fitness. So I share fitness ideas 15 seconds at a time. Most of that channel is shorts that are 15 to 20 seconds. We've got almost 400,000 views. And that's what helps inspire me, because I know folks are looking for something, right? A simple workout. Or I looked at people and was like, oh, you did that, I can do it. Kind of like we talked about the Man Search for Meaning. Like, I'm inspired by other people doing hard things, by folks with one arm that are working out. When I'm like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm like, oh, okay, I should just get up and go, things like that. So yeah, so on YouTube, Hope Is Not a Plan, there's a Facebook page, Apple, Spotify, all the podcast platforms there. And then for work, I manage project managers in a healthcare system. And so, I use some of that background, or quite a bit too, because if you can plan something for work or for a response, and I came from the incident command system, incident management world, as well as public safety, where we would show up and help a locality after a tornado or a missing person or a big 5-alarm fire or whatever, and say, hey, everybody, let's come together and do these things very practically. But when you learn how to do that, you can really plan anything. So that's really the planning element of it. And I share some kind of industry specific stuff, but largely how to get started. And there's some foundational things to talk about on the show of, what's the intent of what you're doing? Do you have good objectives? What's the organization? Do you have your resources, and are you communicating? And it really sounds simple. It's simple in theory. It's a little harder to do because we're humans and we don't always work great together. But if you have those foundations, I think you can use that to put the plan together for some of the things we talked about.
Yeah.
The intent being you getting better from wherever you are in your life. Maybe you're already further along the path. And that, I think, is a great thing about podcasts and YouTube is we can help other people when we've helped ourselves. And I think that's an obligation we
Yes.
should have.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's everybody that I'm encountering now and working with and talking to. All these great people who hit some kind of a wall, helped themselves, and now want to help others, my favorite people on the planet.
Great.
And I would just say to people, go listen to the podcast so you can get some ideas, but give yourself a break, because you don't have to do everything Kevin does and everything Kevin's done, and you don't have to take every suggestion. Take what resonates and leave the rest, but you'll get some really great ideas. And if you can learn to be a planner, if you can learn to make a plan, or how, because getting well and healthy and taking care of your life, whatever that means, your marriage, your relationship with your children, with your siblings, you're with your friends, whatever that is, managing your life, taking good care of your life, it's going to take a little planning, and you're going to have to stick to your plan.
Right.
It doesn't happen. It won't happen on autopilot in survival mode by accident. Right.
No.
So, so I'd recommend just go check it out, and,
Thank you.
take what works for you, and leave the rest of it. Cause I watch some of your stuff sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not getting in that cold tank.
Well, yeah.
I'm not doing that.
All right.
I can barely stand to watch you do it.
Yeah.
So, but then I see other things. I'm like, oh, that's such a great point. I can do that.
That's great. Yeah. I say hope is not a good plan, but good plans will bring people hope. Because it's true, because it worked for me. And when you bring folks together and yourself to the right place, and you realize, oh, there is a path, and these are the steps I can take, and you keep doing that over and over again, it for sure puts you in a better place.
Yes. Excellent. Well, I've enjoyed talking to you so much. Thank you so much for just the good work you're doing in the world, trying to reach out and help other people. I will include I'll do a slide here in the closing that will include your contact information and where people can find you. And I'll also include that information in the show notes. So if you're watching this on Pause First Academy, you can just tap into the show notes and get all the information. And you'll know where to reach out if you want to get a hold of Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. It was good to catch up.
Thanks for your time today. Good to see you.
For sure.
Take care.